So welcome to the floor is Ritesh, who's going to actually take us through beyond efficiency and harnessing managed accounts to demonstrate the value to your clients. So welcome to the stage, Ritesh.
Thanks, Francie. My sessions will be quite different to the one that just preceded it. I think we're moving from what was possibly the most technical session to the least technical session. So I feel like it's the Monty Python now for something completely different. I want to talk about this idea that we do a great job in this industry of selling managed accounts on the premise of efficiency. But that is efficiency typically to the advisor, or to the practice. What I have observed, though, is we probably don't quite nail articulating the benefits to the client. And that's where I'd really like to advance the discussion today. Many of you who are tapping away at keyboards right now are not only obviously not finding what I'm saying very engaging, but you're also being inefficient. The reason you're being inefficient is you're using the QWERTY layout on the keyboard, which nearly 100 years ago, two fellas in the States came up with the perfect keyboard layout. A layout, it was the Dvorak layout, which was meant to minimize the distances that your fingers would travel when you type. It would minimize the amount of typos and errors, reduce RSI. It was a slam dunk. And yet, here we are, nearly 100 years later, still tapping on the old inefficient QWERTY keyboard. Go a bit further back in history, there was an invention that revolutionized textiles. It was sort of a loom device that would produce beautiful tapestries in a fraction of the time. And that didn't get taken up because customers at the time actually valued something that was handmade. So they didn't value the efficiency at all. If any of you like baking, you'd probably think that the Betty Crocker mixes are cheating a bit. I'd say marketers have realized this too. They actually produced the first version where you didn't have to add the egg to the mix. It was sort of all packaged together. And they worked out with research that customers preferred it if you made it harder. You actually added a step, stepping away from efficiency because they felt like it was too much of a cheat if you didn't add the egg and mix it up. And one last example here is the IKEA effect, where if you build something, you tend to place more value on the fact that you've built it. So IKEA could probably have more furniture that's pre-assembled, but they've worked out that there's a perverse enjoyment in actually putting these things together. This is more heated than the active versus passive, I think, this one. So from a pure efficiency standpoint, those examples I've just rattled through make no sense at all. They've been thwarted by inertia, what people actually value, all sorts of factors. And I think we're sort of at a similar juncture with managed accounts today. Don't get me wrong, there is plenty of growth in the industry, and I think it's a condition of our IMAP membership to flash this chart up, if I'm not mistaken, Toby. I know we've reached 200 Bill, so there's some more up-to-date numbers than this. But the growth's been fantastic. It's been phenomenal at the 30,000 foot level. We do hear, however, anecdotally, that there's some advisors that have embarked on the efficiency journey, some practices, and they've sort of gotten stuck. And I want to unpack that cohort that sort of lies well beneath the 30,000 foot view, but we think they do exist. We think they're a cohort that we can unlock to sort of unlock even further growth in managed accounts. What I think's going wrong here is that they've been sold this sort of efficiency buzzword, and they're confused. Part of the time, if you really drill down, it's because there's a lack of clarity on their part in terms of their own value proposition and where managed accounts fit into that value chain. You can't just sort of raise managed accounts as a sort of panacea if they don't see how it magnifies or enhances their existing conception of value proposition. It feels tacked on, it feels confected. And I suspect, in fact I know, talking to some advisors, that they're just confused about, I suppose, A, the benefits to their own practice, and B, articulating the benefits of something like managed accounts to the clients. And as I said earlier, we do a good job at talking about efficiency for the practice, for the advisors. I think we can do a better job of articulating the benefits of a managed account structure to the end client. So the value proposition chain, this is just my version here, is fertile ground for lots of introspection. You know, what is an advisor's value proposition? Are they investment experts? Do they see themselves as behavioral coaches? What's their source of advisor alpha, which is a term I've stolen from Vanguard? Unless you've been living under a rock for the last couple of years, there's been plenty of opportunity to test your own investment philosophy, because we lived through a 40-year period with falling interest rates, inflation behaving itself. Everything was easy. Active, passive, it really didn't matter because we were getting absolute returns that were healthy, particularly the boomers. But if you've been paying attention, the last couple of years have been pretty confounding from a textbook perspective. We're still waiting for that US recession that the yield curve said was going to arrive 2 years ago. We've had defensive being revealed to just be a word. We've had, so-called defensive portfolios losing more money than high growth portfolios because inflation's been a beast we just haven't really dealt with over that long period. So plenty of scope to be testing the foundation upon which you're resting your whole value proposition, your investment philosophy. If you don't get that foundation right, then I think the whole question of whether or not you outsource into what structure, that's sort of moot and secondary. So I think in some sense, in a sense, it's a bit snakes and ladders. Advisors are getting bitten by the snake of confusion, despite charging up the ladder of efficiency. And they might need to take a step or two back, get clarity on the foundation before thinking whether or not managed accounts actually make sense in that broader context. So you want to be working with your value proposition, not against your value proposition. They all need to be pulling in the same direction. So that takes some thought as opposed to sort of rushing to this efficiency buzzword. So I want to return to this, but I want to introduce an idea that will help us unpack or attack this problem from different angles. And I've stolen this. Toby, I brought the book in this time. So it's quite shiny, so that's quite gleaming against the lights there. This is a book called Alchemy, which is written by Rory Sutherland, who's an advertising exec. Really entertaining, a British fella. I'd recommend reading that over the summer if you're looking for something that's informative but also very entertaining. And he talks about the fact that oftentimes we solve problems using an engineering mindset. And that's pretty common in our industry. Engineering or a product mindset. Take, for example, if someone asks you to improve passenger services, like a train. I've taken the metro recently. Seems to be working well, which is a surprise for Sydney. If you asked an engineer how to improve train services, they probably think, well, we need to make this faster. We need to make it run more efficiently. Those solutions tend to be more expensive. If you asked a psychologist, they might take a different angle and think, well, how can we make the passenger journey more comfortable, more enjoyable? Which are oftentimes, if you like, a lower hanging fruit when it comes to cost, yet are valued the same or even more by the end client. So I think managed accounts are really fertile ground for both of these perspectives to be at play, particularly compared to traditional funds, because the communication aspect, the transparency, opens up possibilities to sort of put on your marketer or your psychologist hat and think about how clients perceive value as opposed to the way that we typically think about it in this room. So to give you one example, you can think about risk protection in a portfolio as, you might implement some complex tail risk hedging strategy at considerable cost. Or you might take the view that an advisor has the power to shape clients' risk attitudes through education. And really, that has the same effect. Just one will probably cost a lot less than the other. We tend to bias ourselves to the more complex engineering solutions, but I think managed accounts open up possibilities to be thinking about how you can attack that same problem in concert with the advisor from a completely different angle. Right, here's a good example of this. I think it's in the 1930s it might have been. Ocean liners competed on the transatlantic route, and really it was a very blue ribbon route, and they used to compete on the basis of who could cross the Atlantic the fastest. And then when airplanes came, that KPI, that metric, was rendered completely obsolete. And so they pivoted to thinking about, and you can see in the ads here, from fastest ocean service in the world to the left, to getting there is half the fun. Completely reframing what it was that their services actually offered, which I thought was clever. Realizing they were going to fight a losing battle if they stuck to their guns. So I think there's a lesson there if I now return to the value chain and look at each one of those segments from both of these perspectives. If I start with just an advisor's value proposition, there is a bias to measurable outcomes. We do have a culture that prizes measuring things over understanding people. And so we probably feel the need to justify our value to clients to 2 decimal places. It has to be a number. It has to be quantifiable. Otherwise, it feels too fuzzy if we were to take the psychologist view. And actually, frankly, if we focus on the research from end customers about what they value in an advisor relationship, it's rarely outperforming. It's things like peace of mind. It's trust. And I know that feels probably too warm and fuzzy for this room because it's not the way we naturally think about things. But that's the evidence. Likewise, I talked about investment philosophy. I was going to make my presentation much more focused on investment markets because that is what I do on a day-to-day basis, but I'll be brief here. There is a tendency to think about markets as predictable, as mechanical, like a machine. And with that, I think, comes this idea that risk is quantifiable. So I was listening with great amusement earlier on when I think the gentleman at the back raised the idea that we only go with standard deviation because it happens to be the measure that you can put a number on. My contribution to this is risk is an elephant. And if you've heard about the parable of the 5 blind men with an elephant, they're each sort of touching a different part of the elephant. So the guy's got the tail, says, oh, this is a rope. The one who says feels the leg says, oh, this is a tree trunk. The one who's got his hand on the side of the elephant said, this is a wall, and so on and so forth. They've each got one piece of the puzzle, and I think risk is like that as well. Trying to capture risk in a number is a fool's errand, in my opinion. And risk is something that's very much in the eye of the beholder, and good advisors understand this. They've got the power to shape and mold clients' attitudes to risk through education and that sort of and the like. So it allows them to be more relevant, and I think we've sort of lost sight a bit of what risk is. Before Markowitz in the 50s, we did risk management, pre-standard deviation. They used to use concepts like margin of safety and more quaint concepts than standard deviation. I think in a sense, we've gone through the Greek letters and more decimal places, and we've lost a lot of money along the way in ever more sophisticated ways, but I think risk is something we've lost sight of, and it's a very human, very personal thing, and it's mercurial. So plenty of scope, I think, for us to think about risk and markets from both those perspectives. The other thing I'll say about markets being confounding is, as I said, the textbook's really not been helpful in the last couple of years. Poor old macroeconomists have found the last couple of years really bewildering. I mentioned the recession, that still hasn't come. When you rely on data to infer things, it is like Warren Buffett saying, if you hold a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And you can have as many complicated models as you like, but if you're using the last 40 years of data as your raw material, being one benign regime where everything was easy, then no wonder the last couple of years have been bewildering. So we certainly think approaching it from a logical perspective, not just a pure data perspective, will help navigate the environment today. And we're certainly building our portfolios, being quite agnostic. Happy to have active, happy to have passive, happy to have ETFs or smart beta in there. Good ideas can come from everywhere. We're not worshipping at the altar of one particular discipline. We're open to best ideas, and we're open-minded about whether or not ideas that might have worked over the last 30 years will work so well going forward. Because in our view, the environment going forward is very different to the environment that we've just come from. That's enough about investment markets and philosophy. I'll come back to implementation in a moment because I think that's really the focus of the rest of my presentation. But I will touch on the last one, which is this idea of a communication philosophy. We talk about investment philosophy a lot. I mentioned earlier that with managed accounts, the success equation between investments and communication is far more finely balanced in our view. So it follows that you should have a defined communication philosophy as well. What does good communication to clients look like? Is it a fire hose of information where you talk about the NASDAQ was up 5%, the Nikkei was down 10%, this blow-by-blow mechanical description of what's happened in markets that clients frankly don't understand? Or do you want to move in the direction of storytelling, analogies, kind of more of that wisdom angle as opposed to just information, mere information? So I've sort of revealed where we sit on that spectrum, but whatever your view is, I think you want to be thinking about not just the investment solution in isolation, but how that's communicated. As a portfolio manager, when I think about an appropriate building block in managed accounts, it's subtly different to a traditional fund because I'm very acutely conscious of the task that the advisor has to explain this to clients. So something can work really well on a spreadsheet in an ivory tower perspective, but if it's hard for an advisor to explain that to clients, then I think you're undermining the whole point of managed accounts, which is to make your life easier, without compromising or cutting corners on portfolio construction, sure. But you want to optimize for the solution and the communication of that solution. So back to implementation. There is no such thing as best implementation. I think it's very much dependent on the advisor's value proposition. The way they like to have conversations with clients will then dictate or govern which form of implementation makes sense. But I think we need to move away from purely focusing on efficiency and cost and think about engagement. Because as I said, humans are strange creatures, and oftentimes you present something that's efficient on a platter to them, and they don't nibble because it's something they just don't value as much as perhaps we do. So I guess being street smart in that respect, not just sort of being purely book smart, is perhaps what I'd suggest in terms of the right balance for success in managed accounts. So let me try to bring that to life a little bit. Oh, before I do, I'm going to go back here. I read this great example from Alchemy that talked about the humble doorman. So those hotels used to have the doorman would sort of open the doors. I had a nice one show me the way in today. He could clearly tell I was here for the conference, and he could clearly tell I was navigationally challenged. So he read all of that in about a second. If you take a purely functional, cold view of what a doorman is, you'd say, this is someone who opens doors. So you can replace a doorman with automatic doors or something like that. And in fact, that's what happened in a lot of places. But think about it more broadly, and a doorman is someone who can hail a taxi for you, who can give you directions, who greets customers in the building and knows them by name. It's security for the building as well. There's so much more to their role than just the functional, narrow description of opening doors. And so if you do move to efficiency, I've got to go backwards here, sorry. If you do move to efficiency, you want to make sure that you aren't losing some of that magic, and you want to replace some of the touch points that might be diminishing in the move to efficiency and replace them with engagement, things that you might be missing if you take a very narrow definition of efficiency. So with that in mind, if you are going to move to managed accounts, you are making everything more streamlined, arguably less touch points. We talk about the time saving. You see that ad nauseum, 12 hours or whatever the stat is, that's saved per week when you move to managed accounts. But if you are going to do that, you need to think imaginatively about how you bring some of the benefits of managed accounts to life. If you've got the transparency, then use the transparency. Bring diversification to life. Use that familiarity to breed comfort in a client. If you are going to move to something that's more efficient in terms of being responsive to markets, then highlight the problem to sort of highlight the solution, if you like. The GFC peak to trough was 18 months. COVID took 2 weeks to fall, a bear market, and then we had the Nikkei fall in a day or two, 20%, just last month. So you're going from months to weeks to days. The unit of measurement is changing, and markets are moving far more rapidly. So highlight that to them so that they can at least see the virtue in having something that's responsive. Educate them around the things like the hidden tax of inflation. What parts of your portfolio are specifically put in there to protect or hedge against inflation? Because it is a hidden tax, and we know clients hate paying tax. If you have direct shares in the managed account, that allows you to bring into your conversation this idea of tax destiny. They're not paying a tax outcome from a commingled structure. They've got more control, particularly with an advisor, to manage those after-tax outcomes with those direct shares. Basically, you don't want just less touch points. You want more engagement with your touch points. And you need to think imaginatively about how you bring those into your conversations. Otherwise, you just run the risk that all they see is less paperwork. Some of the ones on the right are questionable. I'm trying to be charitable in putting some of those above the line. But the risk is you move to efficiency, the client just doesn't appreciate it as much, and you're probably in a situation where you're struggling to justify why this move makes sense to the client. I do agree with the earlier comments about risk profiles being, there are a lot of problems with those. And it was actually Rory's boss at Ogilvy who said, clients don't think what they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. And so I recognize the holes in the risk profiling process, but here's a pretty common problem that I think advisors face, which is where you've got a client that's very nervous about markets, so their risk tolerance is really low, but as an advisor, you know they need to take on more risk in order to meet their goals. So their risk capacity is much higher than their risk tolerance. You've got this gap. Now, normally what tends to happen is a compromise solution. I mean, you either strap the client on for a ride they're really uncomfortable with, you ask them to lower their sights, or you meet somewhere in the middle, which is what most advisors tend to do. So here's an example of how a managed account can really help with that problem, depending on how you communicate with your clients. Let's say you identify the risk gap that exists with the client. Through the managed account structure, you've written it in your SOA. This is the solution you're putting them into, but you don't throw all the features at them at once. So you keep the transparency up your sleeve. Take your time. It might take months, might take a year to educate them about the portfolio, the componentry, and then when you think they're ready to understand the detail, then you flick on the transparency. You have the reports, you don't have to use them right away. Make an assessment of when they'd actually be comfortable with that. Then your next step might be opening up the possibilities to them. If they were to take on more risk, this is what they might be able to achieve in their lives. And really, this is a transformative thing if you can achieve it, because if a client's in a higher risk profile, suddenly you've made a far bigger difference to their life than even frankly the active versus passive debate. This is far more material. So if you can do that, get them comfortable in making that quantum leap, you can then do it in a very tax efficient manner because you're not selling down out of one fund and going into another fund. This has been part of your plan all along. So it's almost like buying a flexible airline ticket where you can make changes at pretty minimal cost, is the way I think about it. And so once you get them into the risk profile they need to be in, you've gone through a journey with them that's engaged them, that's educated them, and if they're in a risk profile that now allows them to get sort of better returns, then you've sort of enriched them as well. That's almost like leveling them up if you think about it as a fitness coach. And you've done so using the specific features of a managed account, so the transparency or the portability, has enabled this journey as opposed to it being something completely tacked on to the process. That's just one example. I'm sure the room will be able to come up with far better ones than this one, but you can see what I'm trying to do here, which is look through the client lens and think more creatively about how managed accounts can be part of the solution and enable the solution. So we certainly do think about this with our suite of solutions. We try to think of ourselves as being in partnership with advisors. So we're taking the engineering angle, we're marrying it with the psychologist angle, and we think that that's a better formula for success in managed accounts and engagement. Currently we've got the index SMAs on CFS Edge. In a matter of weeks, we're launching the dynamic SMAs, which will be our best ideas portfolio. And to give you a hint, it's not just active funds. There's active, there's direct shares in there, there are ETFs. We're completely agnostic. So I encourage you to reach out if you're interested in seeing what we think our best ideas portfolio looks like, because it's very open-minded and agnostic. And we also have funds that aren't managed accounts. So there are advisors that say, look, I'm really interested in diversification by asset classes. And we're quite comfortable saying to them, sure, if that's the key criteria for you, then a traditional fund will always have bells and whistles and the ability to get into exposures that a managed account won't. And so if that's important for you, we can offer you those solutions as well. This makes us, we think, quite relevant to a wider cohort of investors. And so we're not just sort of, it's not the Henry Ford model of choice where you can have whatever you like as long as it's an SMA. I can see Francie on the move, so I might pause there and see if there are any questions.
Questions for Ritesh? Yep.
Not a question, Mike, but have you given this presentation to the airline people?
They won't let me in the lounge to give them the presentation.
Rightio.
Well, thank you.